Hey, welcome back to the Pretty Well podcast. I'm Lisa Smith. Today we have such an interesting interview. We have with us today Mel Hopper Koppelman. And Mel has an incredible background. You are going to love her. She's the program director at Synthesis Health Lab and is a go-to expert for people who've literally tried everything to heal their chronic illness, but keep hitting dead ends. By addressing overlooked by addressing over the by addressing the overlooked actors in their nervous systems, Mel helps patients achieve more than a 50% reduction in symptoms without endless supplements and constant lab testing. With two master's degrees and over 15 years of clinical experience, Mel has pioneered an evolutionary approach that combines Chinese medicine, functional medicine, and developmental neurology. Her methods have helped thousands of patients recover from conditions like chronic fatigue, autoimmune disorders, fibromyalgia, when conventional and functional medicine have failed. Instead of chasing symptoms with biochemistry, Mel helps people to understand the fundamental laws of healing and repair their nervous system's foundation. Her mission to transforming health is how her mission is transforming how we approach chronic illness by bridging the gap between ancient wisdom and modern neuroscience. Welcome, Mel.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here.
Thank you. I'm really excited you're here as well. We have so much to talk about today. So, Mel, let's just start. You have an incredible background. You have two master's degree. You have bridged the gap from biochemistry to functional medicine to traditional Chinese medicine, acupuncture. Tell us what led you to become a neurological healing expert and doing all the things that you're doing.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think I had the perfect combination of problems myself that were not easily solved, and they were not solved with my current skill set at the time. So about 8 or so years ago, my entire system crashed, and by that time, I was already uh, a health practitioner. I already had two master's degrees in health-related fields. I'd already been treating for quite a few number of years. And basically, I woke up one morning and my brain didn't work. I couldn't string two words together. My whole body was in pain. I had chronic fatigue. My blood pressure was crashing when I stood up. Um, yeah, so I was in a bit of a mess. And because I already had experience with other sort of challenging health issues, my first thought was like, okay, we got this. Like, I'm going to figure this out, and I'm very well equipped to figure it out, even if my brain's not working. And so if I just, put one foot in front of the other and, do the testing I need to do and do the things I need to do, it's going to be okay. And after a couple of years of kind of going further into what I already knew, I had to kind of accept that it wasn't working as well as I wanted to believe that it was working. And at a certain point, I had to just, humbly step back and say, I am missing something about how people heal, about how our body works, even though I already, was trained in functional medicine and doing a lot of other things. And so I ended up ultimately retraining all of my skill sets. So I say I like declared intellectual bankruptcy and was like, all right, I need to kind of start from the drawing board here. And so that ended up with me kind of restudying Chinese medicine in a whole different way, adding herbs to my practice, Chinese herbs to my practice, and using far fewer supplements, and doing a very deep multi-year study of the nervous system, how it develops, how to assess it, and how it functions, because it turns out that the nervous system is important for health. And in all of my training, I didn't learn really anything about it. So
Mhm.
that was sort of how I ended up learning what what I ended up learning.
Okay. That, first of all, amazing. And I am relating to you so much because in my history as a practitioner, I have come at functional medicine as we're going to find the roots of the problem, we're going to fix the roots, we're going to get everything cleaned up, we're going to put everything back together, and you're going to feel great. And that works sometimes. It really
Yes.
does. It works enough that we say, "Wow, we're we're making a difference in this world and people are getting better and they're, saying you changed my life and that's great. But there are those percentage of people that it just isn't, you're just missing something, and you bang your head against a wall and you're passionate about helping every person get better. And what I have learned in this past year is that I have failed to take enough of a deep dive into the nervous system, into the role of stress and thoughts and feel emotions and trauma. So you've taken a deeper dive. Tell us what you learned as you went back to the drawing board. You declared this intellectual bankruptcy and you started over again. What did you learn?
So the first thing I learned is about the importance of the development of the nervous system. And I would say that even like in the field of functional medicine and other related fields, there is an increasing awareness of the importance of things like stress and thoughts, and early childhood events, but we
Hmm.
don't have a framework for really making sense of it. We can kind of like point to it and say, I think this is important, but
Yes.
we don't, we don't really have a way to work with it. So if someone, there's an increasing amount of research on this early childhood stuff. They study something called adverse childhood events, or they call it ACEs. So we know that if you have a lot of ACEs, if you have a lot of these really stressful early events, it's related to adult health problems, both psychological and physical. But what do you
Mhm.
do with that? So we don't have a good framework. And so the first thing I learned was about nervous system development, and it's fascinating, and it's learnable, and it's foundational. And I think one of my things with studying the nervous system is what I find is that it's always either oversimplified or overcomplicated, for the right. So if I'm listening to like a nervous system expert speak about the role of the brain in stress, they're often oversimplifying it in a way that's actually removing options from people. Or if you hit like a textbook, there's just like endless detail that's not organized in any sort of usable way. So I've been fortunate enough in many areas of finding excellent teachers who can guide the way forward. So when it comes to nervous system development, there's a few things to understand. The nervous system develops like a tree. So all living things develop like trees, and so we develop from the bottom up. There's a right and a left. So the right side of the brain develops in utero in the first 2 years of life, and then it switches over to the left, and then it becomes more and more specialized, and then it comes together to make a functional whole. And increasingly, what I just explained in that one sentence is not happening very well for our younger people, and it also affects the people that I mainly work with who are adults. Anywhere between the ages of 18 and 80, that they're having issues there. And so, in terms of describing that, we can actually assess for that without, large amounts of radiation, or without like, $1 million machines. One area to look at, and this is very overlooked, is assessing for something called retained primitive reflexes. So primitive reflexes are brainstem reflexes that we're born with. So when we're born, we don't have a developed brain. We're adorable, but there's very little we can do. But we do come preloaded with some movements that we can do unconsciously. Things like, roll over and feed from mom's boob. We can call for help. We can do like these limited movements, and the brainstem's also related to heartbeat and breathing. Now, as we develop, which means that we're moving, we're receiving tactile information, we're kind of exploring, that experience drives the development of the brain on top of the brainstem. A bit like a tree is coming up from its roots through the trunk and then crowning out, right?
Mhm.
And so as the brain develops, it comes down and inhibits those reflexes. They're still there, but they shouldn't be active anymore after the age of between 4 months and 1 year old. Okay. Now you can do an exam to assess for those reflexes. And what we're increasingly finding, definitely in kids with neurodevelopmental diagnoses and behavioral issues, they definitely have retained primitive reflexes, and most kids do now. But in my complex chronic health population, adult population, they also often have retained primitive reflexes. So this is pointing to nervous system maturation that did not unfold well, that they may have been functioning well enough to function well enough, right? So
Mhm.
maybe they were like their health was pretty good, and maybe they did pretty well in school, and maybe they were pretty good at sports, and they got a job, and they got married, and they started a business, and they had kids. This is not, I'm not talking about intellectual disability, but there was still some. The foundations were not as strong as they could have been. And so then when we reach a certain point in life where the stressors start piling up, then we often get the straw that breaks the camel's back, and we're not bouncing back the way we have in the past. And part of the problem, often that's overlooked, is that the nervous system didn't develop optimally in the first place. And there's not going to be a supplement or a test that's going to lead you there in terms of the problem or how to fix it.
Wow. So what's an example of these primitive reflexes that we wouldn't expect to see in an ideal world in an adult, but you're still seeing?
Yeah. So in terms of the exam, well, backing up, there are estimated between 40 or 50 of these reflexes. But when children are examined, but in on my my push is that everyone should be examined, because it's I'm not saying this is the cause of everyone's problem, but it is a non-invasive, less than 10-minute exam, right?
Yeah.
So there are about 12 to 14 reflexes that are routinely tested for. And really, it's just giving us a window into the maturation of the brainstem and the maturation of the brain. So some of these reflexes include one's called the spinal galant. So it's when the side of the paraspinal muscles, which are on either side of the spine, if they get stroked downwards in an infant, then the infant will contract over a little bit like an alligator onto the same side. You can actually find videos on Instagram where they're doing this with newborns. It's very cute. But if you are older than 4 months old, then this is not that helpful. It makes it hard to sit still. So you get labeled with ADHD because you're fidgety. It's associated with bedwetting, I think, because it's just pointing to immaturity in the brainstem, which is why people wet their bed um, often. And it also can lead to things like, oh my gosh, hold on, we're going to edit this. I'm blanking on the word I'm looking for. Scoliosis. And it can also lead to things like scoliosis. So it's a very commonly undiagnosed cause of what's called idiopathic scoliosis, which means we don't know why it's there, but you're unlucky enough to have it.
Come on. I was going to ask you off the air about I have severe scoliosis, idiopathic, as a kid. So I was going to ask you, like, let's talk about the role, like, and I was just going to do a deep dive personally afterward. So, okay, idiopathic scoliosis is problematic, very problematic. So, what I hear you saying is it could be some uh, just lack of development or immaturity in the nervous system development early on. And what are we seeing this incomplete development more so now than we used to? Is there, can we look at what we guess to be causative factors or no, or what are your, what's the deal with that?
Yeah. Okay. A few things. I want to address another cause of idiopathic scoliosis, but I'm happy to answer that question. So, is it more common now? Two answers to that. The first is we do not have good data. So we do not have good data on the rate of retained primitive reflexes. If you read any pediatric textbook, it will tell you that they are gone at 12 months. So if they're gone at 12 months, then why do you need to test for it? So
Yes,
children do not receive this exam from the vast majority of pediatricians, which I would love to see changed. As if they're going there for some sort of wellness checkup, why not check if their nervous system's developing well, right? Um,
right.
so what we do have is, more kind of recent studies that are looking at things like there was one study that was done at a daycare somewhere in the Midwest, and this was sort of normal, healthy population. And over 90% of those kids who were ages 6 and 7 had retained primitive reflexes, and the number of retained primitive reflexes was highly correlated with issues in behavior and academic attainment. Okay.
Wow, that's interesting.
So I would say, if you have over 90% of children showing objective signs of nervous system immaturity, I would say so without the data to support me, if you're just asking me for my opinion, which I guess is what we're doing, absolutely that this is happening more and more. So from my perspective, I would say there is not much more that we could be doing to harm healthy childhood development if that were our primary objective. And when people want to know about causes, whatever the top 5 causes are that come to your mind are 5 of those causes. They are all the things. I'm not going to point to one thing
Mm,
because it's we are complex systems
mhm,
that are existing within complex systems, and it's all of these things. So we can point to changes in nutrition. We can point to the exponential rise in elective C-section. We can point to the exponential rise in non-native EMFs. We can point to lack of supported maternity leave. We can look at the tidal wave of growing hormones and chemicals in our environment. We can look at the rise of screens. I mean, anything you want to choose, glyphosate, like it's fine. All of those things. We can't test them in isolation, but
mm.
they're not happening in isolation. And usually when we do test things, these things have synergistic effects. So I feel like I'm on very strong ground, even if I don't have a PubMed search to support me because it wasn't asked and it wasn't tested for, that we are absolutely seeing a rise in this issue.
Mm, yeah. Okay. So, and it would be, yeah, to be even able to test compared to 40 years ago, we wouldn't have the data to look back on anyway. But you make some great points there. So how then, as adults that you're dealing with complex chronic health issues, how do these primitive reflexes come into play as the foundation of health? How are they affecting people's health issues?
Yep. So there's a number of things. So one is that the retained primitive reflexes are both a sign of a problem and can be a cause of a problem. So if they are there, they are an objective sign that your brain is not functioning well to inhibit them. Them being retained, which is to say that they never went away in the first place, is one possible cause. Another is head injury, and the third is neurodegeneration.
Mm,
But
okay.
but however you slice it, it's not a normal finding on an exam.
Yeah.
so so if they are retained, which we can get a sense by asking a good history, right? Like idiopathic childhood scoliosis. I know that something was off in your vestibular system, whether it was a cause or effect. We can go into that in a minute. So it's telling us objectively that there's an issue with brainstem development. So that leads to a number of things. So that can lead to all the dysautonomias. So people standing up and their blood pressure crashing, or standing up and their heart's racing, because all of that is regulated in the brainstem. It's telling us about higher brain functions that are not happening, and the brain's kind of important. So if it's not working well, we don't do well. And so this also gets into the conversation about the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere. So they do different things and they give different contributions, partly to our personality and to how we see the world, but also to our physiology. So, for example, the left hemisphere ramps up the inflammatory response and the immune response, and the right hemisphere calms it down and it has the anti-inflammatory reflex. So if your left hemisphere is overdeveloped and your right hemisphere is underdeveloped, then you might be chronically inflamed for really, no obvious reason. And if your
Mhm.
right hemisphere is relatively overdeveloped and your left hemisphere is relatively underdeveloped, you might have a really sluggish immune system and be prone to having chronic lingering infections. So that can show up. Another aspect is that people are increasingly aware of something called your vagus nerve, and that
Mm.
is one of the nerves in your brainstem. It's called a cranial nerve because it's like in the skull vault here, and it comes out and it goes everywhere, right? And people, I think it's helpful to talk about this, that there's actually 2 places in our brainstem that vagus nerve comes out of. There's an older branch and a newer branch.
Mm.
Okay. So the
Okay.
older branch is called the dorsal vagus nerve because it's towards the dorsum, towards the back fin over here. And then the ventral vagus is like, that's the tummy part, right? So they're kind of located here. The Dorsal is the more ancient one. It's the one that develops first in utero. That helps us have a shutdown response if we need to. And then the ventral vagus is the one that people talk about as being like associated with the warm fuzzies and chewing your food and feeling gratitude and hanging out with people. That is the more recently evolved part of the vagus nerve, which means that it's the more recent to develop when you were developing. And so in your last trimester in utero and your first year of life, that ventral vagus nerve is getting myelinated, which means it's developing and getting faster. So if you're having unevenness or issues with your brainstem development, or you're having these adverse childhood events, then that vagus nerve doesn't myelinate properly in the first place. So here's one takeaway. I think this is fascinating. People are increasingly talking about the role of leaky gut in the cause of health issues. And usually the recommendation, depending on what you find, is to change the diet, make it less inflammatory, to remove dysbiosis, and to do this sort of 4R protocol, right? Well, when we are born, our gut is supposed to be leaky, and we have our breast milk, and it perfuses into the body. It goes straight in. And then as this ventral vagus nerve is developing and myelating, then the gut seals up, and then we switch to solid foods. So if you are an adult who has retained primitive reflexes because you had these developmental hiccups, then your gut may have been always leaky for your whole life. And when you remove the foods, which is maybe like a helpful step, it's not actually solving the problem. So no matter what you do, the gut remains leaky because you're not addressing the actual cause in this case, which is that it didn't develop in the first place.
Okay. So both of these things I hear you saying, and I appreciate it because functional medicine sometimes gets into that pill for an ill. It's very much like a conventional medicine process. We identify what's wrong, we give you some supplements instead of pharmaceuticals, and we send you on your way. And we give you some lifestyle changes as well and some dietary changes. But these things that you're talking about, Mel, you got to help us out. What do you do about them? They sound like, these things started in utero and soon thereafter. What do you do?
Yep. So I always make a point of not testing for things that are not solvable. Right.
Perfect.
We want to find a
Exactly.
problem that
What
can't
are
do
you
it.
going to do with it then? Right.
Yeah,
Exactly.
exactly. And so really the way, there's an increasing appreciation of the plasticity of the nervous system. That means that the brain is very changeable given the right inputs and given the right conditions. So in terms of what you do about it, the way the nervous system develops, which is both when you're a baby and now when you realize that you have this issue, is through stimulation. So we can stimulate these reflexes to help the areas of the brain above it to develop. We can also do more top-down approaches using things like red light on the underactive parts of the brain. We can use input through the eyes and through the ears, through the vestibular system, and so on. This all needs to be individualized, which makes sense. But
Mhm.
basically, through stimulation, this is how we develop areas that are underdeveloped.
So cool. So you can go back and fix this. So it could have been underdeveloped for a number of reasons, but say it just didn't develop properly. Those primitive reflexes didn't go away when they should have. Then you can develop the brain in that tree, that network, so that they begin to diminish as they should. Am
Yeah,
I
so
understanding you correctly?
I think you are. And with the reflexes, and this is really a principle of nature, they don't go away. They just get integrated into the system to be used for more sophisticated things.
Oh, cool. Okay, so what's an example of someone you've worked with in this particular capacity and take us from where they started and how you saw them change over time?
Yeah, gosh, there's a lot of examples. Who should I
Yeah, putting
who
you
should
on
I
the
think?
spot. So,
Yeah, no. Well, I mean, it's funny. Like I'm thinking of one woman that I worked with. She was actually a fellow practitioner in Australia, who joined my group, and well, actually, she has an interesting history. She I don't know how you feel about talking about this, so you can let me know.
okay.
She is fairly healthy, but developed a sudden breast cancer diagnosis after COVID injection. Right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, let's go.
Should we go for it? Okay.
Yeah,
Right.
absolutely.
Okay, so that breast tumor out of the blue started growing very fast in an otherwise healthy individual. And so she joined my group, and so what, in the group, what you learn how to do is go through a step-by-step process for reversing complex chronic health issues. And the analogy I give is like renovating a house. So if you're going to renovate a house, what you need to do is going to be very individual depending on the house, but there is a correct order to go in. So if you have a leaky roof, it's not going to make any sense to start changing out your electrics or putting in new carpets. They're just going to get wet, right? Same for the body, that if the exterior of the body is dysfunctional, then we're going to start there, and support the immune system, and we go in the step-by-step order. So we did that with her, and she was very interesting. And she was also one of these people, which I think is a very increasing trend, is that she was being diagnosed with like adult ADHD in perimenopause, right?
Huh. Yeah.
Yeah. So she did great. She, went through the stages of the program, and then she got to the section. I actually teach people how to have someone close to them do this primitive reflex exam. She's in Australia. I don't have anyone really to refer her to. So her husband, who's an engineer, did the exam on her, and they recorded it so I could see. And she had all of these retained primitive reflexes. And so, first of all, just the recognition that was because it's like I say, it needs to be interpreted in the context of a history. So if the person doesn't have a history that fits that, but they had a head injury, then that's the more likely explanation. But in her case, it was like, oh, I was always a little bit different, and I was always really good at these things and really challenged in these areas, and so it kind of it fits the history, but it also was important for her because, like a lot of people, they're being told it's really important to regulate your nervous system and manage stress and do this breathing, and that's not, it's not bad advice. Almost all advice is good sometimes. That's just
Yeah.
not going to do anything for this particular issue. And also, if she has, this imbalance pattern where her right hemisphere is stronger and her left hemisphere is weaker, then that's going to be a predisposing factor to developing cancer because the immune system is less vigilant. So all these factors come together into this area, but she did really well, and she was able. And what was nice as well is that what I see is that a lot of people, I say women who are perimenopausal because this is a really common thing, but men too. I see people who are in, let's say, their 40s getting diagnosed with these childhood neurodevelopmental diagnoses, like autism or Asperger's or ADHD. And on the one hand, it's like a really positive thing for them. It feels like it explains so much of their life, that there was a lot of negative self-talk about their inability to do certain things, and that feels like they can have more self-compassion. And I'm all for more self-compassion. But
Sure.
if it's in the context of a neurological exam that you can actually do exercises to address the findings, then you can outgrow it.
Oh, cool.
So so you can have the ADHD diagnosis if that's helpful for you, to have more self-compassion or whatever it is you need. And then you do the exercises, and then all of a sudden your nervous system is regulating better and your brain's working better, and you no longer have the behaviors that led to the diagnosis of the ADHD in the first place.
Oh, that is so neat. Yeah. Yeah. I just, this is it's such a blind spot. It's not something that people, it's something probably you have these annoying symptoms over years and years, and you're like, that's just the way I am. It's just, but to be able to actually start to do things that will change it and move the needle is huge.
And
So, oh, go ahead.
there's a bigger part of this conversation, which is that while on the one hand, because you asked the question, like, is this because is this issue of uneven or incomplete nervous system maturation getting bigger? And my opinion is absolutely exponentially.
Mhm.
But we're also entering into a period where maybe because people don't have a better option, they're kind of celebrating our differences,
Right.
and so there's a resistance to this perspective that the nervous system can be examined and people can have some of these tendencies improved, because it's almost like we're criticizing who they are. And so I've actually received a lot of pushback when I'm talking about how the areas of the brain that give rise to the behaviors that lead to these diagnoses and what you can do about it, because people are mistaking what I'm saying with perhaps much older views of basically trying to say, people need to be normal in this way, and
Mm,
anything that's not like everyone else is bad. That's absolutely not what I'm saying. What I'm
mm,
saying is that if we can support you to have healthy neurodevelopment, no matter how old you are, you can be more of yourself, you know? And like, I don't believe for a second that a kid who is can't make eye contact and is stimming is that's just who they are. I this is a
mm.
behavior that's arising from a neurological problem. The example I usually give is if someone comes to see me because they have IBS, I'm not trying to put them in some sort of digestive normative category of judging their diarrhea and trying to put them into a box. I'm trying to help them have better digestion.
Right.
And
No,
this is
I hear where you're coming from, and that I appreciate you bringing that point up. This is about something that is that is that someone would come to you, a client or patient, and they would themselves see it as problematic, and you're able to help. We can help you feel so much better. Like this can be improved. You're not looking at changing who somebody is. I can hear that completely. And if we're being honest, a lot of what these experiences are, they're much further reaching than behavioral. They're related to complex illness in addition to that. So it's also helping longevity, vitality, all the things. And if we even take that back to the gut is one of the roots of overall health, then if all of this is helping to improve gut and gut brain connection, everything else, you're just completely improving quality of life. So,
that's the idea.
yes, I appreciate that. One of the things that you talk about is the four-stage process of recovering from complex chronic health issues. Walk us through that. Have we already started? And when I just for our listeners' sake, when we're talking about complex chronic health issues, let's put some names to it to bring it home. Things like fibromyalgia, any kind of autoimmunity, chronic fatigue syndrome, mold illness, possibly long chronic Lyme, those kinds of things. Let's talk about that four-stage process.
Absolutely. So this is something I was lucky enough to learn from very smart people who studied with other smart people. So I didn't come up with this, but it was something I'd been looking for a really long time. Because when someone has a complex chronic illness, almost by definition, they have multiple systems that are not working well.
Mhm.
Because, there are plenty of times that someone is really struggling and they change their diet and then they're doing well, right? And I
Mhm.
love it when that happens.
Yes.
Those are often not the people I'm seeing. They've already changed their diet. They've already done a
Yeah.
lot of things.
Yeah.
And so then there's a question, well, it's not a question of whether or not their digestion's inflamed or their hormones are dysregulated or, name anything else. Like all of these things are in play. They're inflamed. All these things are going on. Where do we start? And the best way I can explain it is there was a game, it was like a board game from the 1980s called Mastermind, where you had these like four colored pegs and they were behind like a screen. And then the person had to code break and figure out what the four pegs you had were, what color they were. And so the way you would do that is you're not, if you're, unless you're psychic and you're trying to kind of guess it, you're strategically putting in sequences that are going to tell you yes or no about and make progress forward about what the four color sequence is. And so that's sort of how we're approaching it here in terms of the inputs we use and also the order we go in. So the order we go in is basically what is the starting point that I can do that's least likely to make this person worse? So,
Mhm.
for example, if I do something to increase their circulation, which is actually a pretty common strategy, is there a possibility I'm going to make things worse? Well, actually, yes, because a lot of people with these complex chronic illnesses, they have chronic infections, hidden infections, dysbiosis, pathogens, biofilms, and the body has poor circulation because it's trying to reduce circulation because it's trying to keep those out of the circulation. It's trying to keep it out of the brain and out of the organs. So it's shutting it down. So it can lead you to feel unpleasant, like you're cold or you're lightheaded or you're tired and you're stiff and you're in pain, but it doesn't want to increase circulation. It's trying to help you. So
Yeah.
it's not uncommon for someone, for example, with fibromyalgia to go for a massage and then they feel like hungover the next day and they have this huge flare because they've started with stage 4 when really they need to start in stage one. Same thing with the gut. There's a lot of wise people who talk about starting with the gut, but a lot of the people I see have like removed almost everything from their diet besides air. And if they like reintroduce anything, they're inflamed because they need to calm down the immune system. The immune system has no tolerance. And one difference with the Chinese medicine map of the body is that we can actually separate the immune system from the digestive system a lot more easily. Whereas I think with functional medicine, there's more of this kind of understanding of like 90% of the immune system is in the gut, and it's the longest surface of the body that's in contact with the outside world, which is right. But we do actually have an exterior and an interior of the body that is really separate systems, according to this kind of more detailed ecological map. So we start with supporting the immune system, not boosting it, by the way, which is kind of, I would say, of questionable wisdom. And part of my journey here was learning about something called the cell danger response.
Yeah.
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 So this is a kind of almost like a theory of everything of biochemistry that talks about the 3 steps that all cells go through when they're stressed or infected in order to heal and to become stronger. And so when we understand that, then there is no kind of boosting the immune system because it's not a seesaw. It's a cycle and it can only go forward, right? It can't go backwards. So I think a lot of the wisdom and knowledge from that model are actually rediscovering things that Chinese medicine already understood in terms of the stages of healing. So the stages of healing that I've been using with, just much more consistent success and results are starting with the immune system, moving to the digestive system, then we get to the neuroendocrine system, and that's really mainly about regulation. And improving how that system is responding. Then we move to improving circulation if that's clinically relevant. So if someone has like a history of concussion, for example, we might do that there. Also, things like scars, can play a big role in overall health, and any unhealed injuries. Even certain types of growths and things can be a circulation issue. And then it isn't until stage 5 where we get to what we call boosting, which is where most people start, which is about like taking things like hormones and nutrients, and you're deficient in everything, and just you need to top everything up. And again, there's partial truths to everything, but in this time and place and era in our culture, that's people aren't really starving. At least the people that I see in my practice are not starving, and it's really a matter of removing what's there that shouldn't be there first, and then seeing what self-corrects. So if we again go back to our house renovation metaphor, you're going to do demo and removal before you start buying furniture, right? And then you're going to see what furniture you need.
Yes, that's such a great point. I always felt that way about lab testing. But like people would come to me and they'd say, "Aren't you going to run all the labs?" And I would say, "I'm not," because first of all, we can only work on one thing at a time. Well, maybe more than one, but not all of them at a time. And then your internal terrain's going to change. As soon as we start changing one area, everything else is going to start to change too. So then some of those lab tests that you've paid all that money for become obsolete. They're irrelevant to what we're doing in the future. So I love that framework, and it makes so much sense that you would first start with looking at immunity and then you would work through to GI and neuroendocrine. But let's unpack the cell danger response, because I think that would be really interesting for our listeners to understand. I know with the mitochondria, they are actively involved in that, and they will switch from their main goal of energy production, although they do so much more, but it will change them. So let's talk about that. Not even just the mitochondria angle, just the whole cell danger response. What is it, and
Yeah.
what do people need to know about it?
Sure. So what so it was so that the theory of the cell danger response, or I think he's even maybe rebranded the cell healing response, which was which was a suggestion that I made, that
Good
was in
one.
his most recent paper, is that it's this understanding that first, that all of the 70 trillion cells in our body are very similar to single-celled cells from 3 trillion years ago, and they that when they are stressed, they go through this 3-step process. And so it's this understanding that we were taught in high school biology that the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell and its job is energy production. But what we now know is that I would say it's like a signal transducer of the local environment that is telling you what's going on over here and broadcasting it so that the brain can understand what's going on in that area. And it can also shift the cell from energy production mode, let's say of peacetime, if we use that metaphor, into battleship mode, where the energy that was being used for normal housekeeping functions is now being used for inflammation and in the immune response. What's often left out of the discussion, which is kind of very important to me because I'm looking at a Chinese medicine lens, and I find that to be a very accurate model from a first principles perspective, is that in his original paper in 2014, where he's first describing the cell danger response, he has this long discussion of winter and summer metabolism and how what's going on with the cellular biochemistry completely shifts based on temperature and light and nutrient availability. And the cell danger response, which we think of often as inflammation, and that's really step one of inflammation, is really just a high amplitude summer metabolism. So it's taking the normal things and making it hotter in order to kill viruses or whatever we're doing. We can also go into a hibernation response, which is big cold, and that doesn't get talked about hardly at all. So a lot of the people I see get missed by everyone because they're like underinflamed, and their blood pressure is low, and they're told that their blood pressure is nice and low, and they're just struggling because they're stuck in this sort of suspended animation state where they can barely function. And so what you can see, because he's using something called metabolomics. So when we do regular blood tests, we're kind of measuring, I don't know, a dozen or a couple dozen different markers. But what researchers now can do is sort of measure almost all the markers at once and then see what changes. And so Bob Navio was using metabolomics. And what we see is that when he's talking about summer and winter metabolism, well, I don't want to interrupt myself, but first of all, it really it puts into question a lot of our interpretations of the lab tests. Because, for example, one of the markers that's used to diagnose people with a vitamin B6 deficiency is normally elevated when we are in summer metabolism. So it may just be a normal, healthy reflection of that. It's not necessarily a nutrient deficiency. It can be a nutrient deficiency, but it isn't always. But the other thing that's very exciting to me is that when you look at all of the biochemistry involved in summer and winter metabolism, what you end up is with what the Chinese called hot and cold. And they have done metabolomic studies on their herbs that are like kind of the stereotypically hot herb and the stereotypically cold herb. And then they do mice studies and do hot diseases and cold diseases. And what they are showing is they are describing summer and winter metabolism. So we don't really need a fancy metabolomics test, because what we also learn from Chinese medicine is how to get a tremendous amount of information using our senses. And then if we really need to do a lab test, sometimes those can be useful, but that's not our primary tool.
Wow. Okay. So let's think this through. How does that, as we're looking at what's an example that we could talk about so that we go from where we are now to where someone can bring it home and it hits home different.
Sure. So one of the kind of increasingly popular labels that people are giving is something called mast cell activation syndrome. So that's basically an excessive amount of cell danger response 1. So cell danger response 1 involves histamine release, which is, again, a 3 billion year old biochemical. And its job is to kind of make holes in things to increase blood flow and the influx of immune factors for healing. And so that would be, so if people are getting seasonal allergies, or they're getting, again, mast cell activation or whatever it is, that would be an example of cell danger response 1, anything that's red, whatever we associate with acute inflammation. Cell danger response 2. So, well, let me answer this a different way. So the first step of healing is to neutralize the threat and to sequester the threat so it doesn't spread. Step 2 is to replace the damaged tissue. So we go into a mode of cell division in order to replace the damaged tissue, to regrow. And step 3 is then to have those new cells reintegrate with the 3-dimensional network. Okay.
Okay.
So if people get stuck in step one, then they get all of this, the mast cell stuff, and inflammation and redness and all this stuff. If they get
Yeah.
stuck in step two, then they get, then you can develop cancer, for example, because you're basically trying to replace tissue without reference to the three-dimensional whole.
You've got this
Um,
proliferation, but it's not integrating. Okay.
Right. And that's why we develop cancer. It's not this bad guy who comes to attack you. It is your body trying to heal, but not having the resources or not having the integration to be able to pull it off. It also, obesity, anything that's associated with excessive growth. And then cell danger response three is a problem of integration. If you look at the examples that Bob Navio gives, it can be things like autoimmunity, it can be a lot of neurodevelopmental things, or a lot of neuropsychiatric things. So even something like post-traumatic stress disorder could be considered cell danger response three. That said, I like to then at this point take it back to what I call like the first principles or the ecological map, the Chinese medicine map, because
Yeah.
they have a super sophisticated three-dimensional model of where these things are happening in reference to the hold. And they also have a really keen understanding of this idea of hot and cold, that we can allow us to use therapeutics in a really sophisticated way.
Okay. So let's talk about these first principles. Let's unpack that more.
Sure. So it's really this, it's first principles, or I think about being kind of physics based, or even just using the principles of ecology. These are things that are kind of always true, whether you're recognizing them or not. So first principles are things that were in existence when life first started on the planet 3 billion years ago. Things like hot and cold, light and dark, moisture, is it wet or dry? These were the things that actually drove the development of single cells into multicellular organisms. And then we basically developed a nervous system so we can move around the earth. So those first principles, they would be how you would describe any habitat, any ecology. If you wanted to start a garden, this is what you would need. And really, when you look at a person who has a health issue, you can learn some very simple things to be able to see this very clearly. And a lot of this understanding was really innate to human civilization, that people without medical training knew this. They knew what to cook in order to balance these things out, and they knew what problems people would have based on the climate that they were in. And this was things that people knew before we were talked out of it, in the kind of better living through chemistry movement of like, you don't know anything because you don't have 17 PhDs and you don't understand this Greek that I'm saying, and you don't have a fancy machine, therefore you don't know anything about what's going on. And so part of this is really how to reteaching people how to use their eyes and ears and smell to get real data that, by the way, is very much consistently confirmed when we use lab analysis to track whether there's an objective truth to any of this.
Yeah. So that to me sounds like an incredible bunch of tools in a toolbox that everyone could benefit from. So how do you begin to teach people
Yeah.
these tools?
Yeah, so it's tools in a toolbox, and it's a tools in a toolbox, and it's a framework, right? So if we're renovating our house, the tools are the hammer and the drill, but first we're looking at the roof first, right? We need to learn that too. And then once the roof is fixed, then we're moving on. So I teach this in my online program. It's completely online. I've people all over the world going through this, and it really is learning health creation as a lifelong skill, where you can learn these skills and go through these steps, and you learn this process. And it's done with an online video program, so you can watch things as many times as you need to, and a group where you can ask me as many questions as you have, where people are going through this journey together and learning. And it's phenomenal. The level of understanding that people in that group have surpasses 99% of practitioners, that they really understand the distinctions of how their body works, how to evaluate new information, how to evaluate like new claims on a new gadget, and they also know what to do when things go wrong. They know what to do when their kid brings home a cold, or if they have a procedure coming up. So it's awesome.
That's amazing. Yeah. So can you give us an example of something someone learns that they take away and go, oh my gosh, that is so simple. I wish I would have known this 20 years ago.
That happens a lot. I think the main one that happens with is learning the order of operations. That, the people in the group they've been around the block a bunch of times. They're smart. A lot of them are practitioners. They are not still struggling for lack of trying or lack of
Mm.
intelligence. They've been at it. And then when they learn the order of operations, they see why the really amazing thing that seemed to work for everyone else and that like they thought was going to be helpful wasn't. It was often because they used it at the wrong time. And that's a big aha. And then the next is really this different way of using inputs. So we think about trying to reach for whether it's a supplement or a herb or a gadget to fix a problem rather than to support a process. And if you use an input as a probe rather than as something you think is going to fix you, then you can always learn about what's going on with you based on how you respond.
So, as an example of that, pain or a symptom of some sort, you use that as a probe rather than saying, I have to shut down this headache or I've got to shut down this pain in my back. Instead, using it as from a standpoint of curiosity and saying, wait, what's this telling me? And
Mm,
letting go. Is that what you're saying, or is that not
Yeah,
the?
that's a little bit different. So we do that too. So we look, there's a whole module on how to interpret different causes of pain, the different types of pain. It's a bit like, when babies cry, they actually have different cries based on
Mhm.
what they need, right? So the same
Sure.
thing in the body, that we have different types of pain depending on what's causing it. So we definitely go into that, but this is more using inputs as probes. So for example, if I can give you a warming herb, or you decide to take a warming herb, you see if you get better or not. If it helps you, then you had a cold problem because warming you helped. If you flare, then that tells you had a warm problem. This is okay. This is built in because we've just learned something that we can pivot from, very specific, and you learn how to do this. And those are the reps. So we're not trying to always go for actually, we're almost never trying to go for the slam dunk. I'm not reaching off of my Mel's shelf of magic remedies that I know are going to help you. I know you're a complex person. I know you have multiple causes going on and multiple areas that are having issues. We're going to start here. And when you do this, I'm going to teach you how to interpret your feedback. So no matter what happens, you've made progress because now you know the next thing you need to do.
That's fantastic. Tell us about, I'm going to ask you one question, then I want to hear about your program and how people find you and work with you and join your program. But if there's one simple thing someone could take away today, that's always my mission for Pretty Well, is that anyone could listen to absolutely any episode, take one thing away, and it could be transformative if they continue to stay consistent with it. What's one of your favorite things someone could take away today?
Okay, one of my favorite things is because this is based on cultural trends.
Okay.
Our culture tends, whether you are sort of very health informed or not, tends to be very has a lot of cold inputs in the diet. So if you're on like what a lot of people think of as a healthy diet, a lot of people are having things like smoothies and iced coffee and salads on a background of too much antibiotics, which are also big cold. And then the digestion wants to be 100-degree soup, and most people's problems are being caused by cold anyways. I think that people get confused about this idea of inflammation, and they think that if they just have tons of raw salad that they can put the fire out. But more often the problem is that people are cold. And even if people have these histamine responses like heat, that heat is coming from your internal battery. So once that gets cleared out, you might be cold, right? It's the same thing if a fire burns down your house, afterwards it's going to be cold, right?
Mhm.
So if I could give one piece of advice that's going to benefit the most number of people, is that you want to experiment with ditching the smoothie, especially the green smoothie that's like extra cold, and the salad for weight loss, and see what happens if you start giving yourself kind of soups and stews and food that's been warmed, and that sort of thing. And not 100%, but many people who live in non-tropical environments, that come from this background will benefit. So just paying attention to not getting so much cold in your stomach all the time.
Oh, that's great. That's a great something different, a different takeaway. Now that may change seasonally, is that right? If your environment gets extremely hot because of summer, hot and humid, I'm in South Carolina, it gets quite hot here, then that advice might change based on seasons and where you live and that kind of thing. Yes.
There is a seasonal component to it.
Okay.
especially if you're healthy, right? Because what does healthy mean? Healthy means you are cycling with your environment. That
Yeah.
means that your physiology is at nighttime physiology at night and daytime during the day. And it means that it's in winter physiology in the winter and summer in the summer. That is health.
Mm. Yeah.
So if you are in South Carolina and you are not healthy, you're not cycling with nature, you're in AC all the time, you don't sleep, you're constipated, and all of these things, you might still need a few more years of warming before the Greek yogurt and salads in July are going to be helping you.
So cool. Very interesting. Okay. Well, there's so much there you have. You're an amazing wealth of information. This is so much fun. Tell me and tell us, how do people find you, work with you, join your program? What's your program called?
So the program is called, it's at the Synthesis Health Lab, and your listeners can apply to be a guest for free. So guest period is about 2 weeks long. So I look through all the applications. If you're a good fit in terms of your clinical presentation and what your goals are, and also we have a really nice group, so everyone needs to be kind of respectful, nice, because the internet's pretty big. Then you can come in. You are in the group with the annual members, so you can ask me any questions. You can look over my shoulder as we celebrate wins, and also as I troubleshoot things, because with complex chronic illness there are backslides, and so we learn how to manage those. And you get access to, like, I don't know, 60 odd lessons about this kind of different way of thinking. And then if you feel like you see a future for yourself there and want to go through a longer term transformation, then you can apply to be an annual member.
Okay, great. And that's at your website,
Yeah,
synthesishealthlab.com.
synthesishealth.co.
.co. Okay, and then how do people find you on social?
So sometimes I'm on Instagram, synthesishealth.co. Sometimes I'm on Facebook,
Okay.
facebook.com/ I think Mel Hopper, no, Mel Hopper Koppelman acupuncture or something like that. I am trying to reduce my time on the socials.
Yeah, good thinking. Good, especially when we're talking about the importance of the nervous system.
Exactly.
Yeah, excellent. Is there anything else that you want to share with our listeners today before we wrap up?
Yeah, just once you get the pieces together, the body is incredibly resilient. So if you've been unwell for a long time and you're still trying, then I can tell you that once you get those pieces in place, you really can get better.
Oh, I